whole place to yourselves. So I should probably introduce myself, shouldn't I? Mandrake. I'm a magician. I make things disappear. It is amazing how just a little bit of music can lighten the mood.
Where are you taking us?
Home.
On screens across the ditch since August 12 and coming to selected Australian cinemas from September 9. Coming Home in the Dark is an absolutely nerve-shredding thriller, and we welcome to screen watching the man who put it all together, the film's director, Mr. James Ashcroft. Thank you so much for joining us, James.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let's some of the film's coverage so far, you know, it cites films like Wolf Creek and the Rutger Hauer classic The Hitcher in its use of open roads and remote locations. But, you know, no spoilers, but a big chunk of that is kind of played out in Act 1. It's like you and Eli Kent, the writer, sort of recognised the genre template, then tossed it away. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we grew up on films like The Hitcher and a lot of those road movies, and that's very much a part of the story. But you know, it's one of those stories. Even Owen Marshall's short story that the work's inspired by is one that it starts out as one thing and then it becomes something else. So it's quite a surprising film in that respect, and I like that it sort of subverts some of those, you know, conventions that are associated with those road trip thrillers.
How much of Owen's story is in there? You allude to it sort of taking bits of it, and I know from some other research I've done that Owen's story kind of ended and have had a less developed Erik Thomson character in that one. How much sort of made it to the screen?
Yeah, I mean, look, the premise of Owen's and the intention of Owen's, you know, original short story is absolutely there. I would say, to be honest, it's the first 20 minutes of the film is, you know, pretty much beat for beat the short story as it stands. Ultimately, the short story sort of ends there, and it's a you know, short story about violence, the random acts of violence that happen on our landscape. And you know, we remain true to that intention to an extent, but there was a big question for us when I optioned the short story of how do we get underneath that very potent kernel of an idea to have it speak to something more personal and contemporary to audiences to engage with, and that's where we brought in that element of, you know, the long shadow of state-run institutions and the effects that, you know, that are still being felt today.
Your leading man, Erik Thomson, certainly embracing his everyman kind of dad bod and challenging fans of his, you know, favourite TV father persona. What does an experienced presence like Erik's add to a tough physical shoot like Coming Home in the Dark, and a sort of challenging material as well?
Yeah, look, Erik was a real sport. I mean, you know, this is my first feature. Erik's a very well-known actor, you know, both here And in Australia, he's the mutual middle-class father, good man figure for both countries, I think. So, and that's why I wanted to cast Erik in that role. And I think ultimately, too, that's why Erik wanted to play this role, because it was sort of, subverting aspects of that characterization that he's so used to. Normally he's filming on a beach or in a very comfortable home. So this was slightly different for him. And, it was a really tough shoot. It was 20 days on location at night in the middle of winter here. That discomfort that you see on screen is palpable because it's real.
Yeah.
It's what the actors were going with. We're all rugged up, of course, and they're running around with, whatever their day clothes were. But he brings that wonderful, earthy, grounded, relatable, value to his characters and his characterization. But and he just gave me a lot of confidence, and really, really helped hold that on the set, as well as, a well-known actor.
You lean into, well, I guess I'm fascinated by the grey areas you work with Mandrake, the brilliant Daniel Gillies. He commits this terrible act, this brutal act, sort of 5 minutes after you introduce him, and then we spend the film sort of getting inside his head, and I'm thinking, you're performing this balancing act with the audience, reconciling his motivations, which we kind of agree with, and his actions, which we clearly don't agree with. So it is a complex killer in the way that, the John Jarratt in Wolf Creek or other sort of genre tropish kind of road killers aren't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see the world in black and white terms. I'm very much drawn to stories and characters that, sit in that grey space. And I think one of the things that Eli and I are very much drawn to is that question of the grey in characters, whether you agree with them or not, whether their actions are, reprehensible or they need to have their comeuppance or balance needs to be restored is by the by. I think, rich characters are the grey ones. And in this case, all these characters sort of, they dance on that sort of tightrope between good and bad. Because I think if you black and white any of these characters, then we're able to put them at a distance. We're able to sort of go easily, that's not me. That's not somebody I know. With this, there's a level of accountability we're wanting to, look at and discuss and open up a conversation about with this film. And that requires an audience to sort of, make decisions for themselves. And by presenting, obviously a character who does some pretty reprehensible things like Mandrake, as well as Tubbs, it's interesting to start the film feeling a certain way about them and then feeling slightly compromised and questioning your thoughts about them at the end. And the same with the other characters in the film, specifically Hoagie.
The hot button issue of systemic abuse is one of the hot button issues in you deal with these characters. The other, and I'm keen to delve into this with you, is the race issue, the Maori Pākehā mix in both the family and the killers. What role did you see race playing in your narrative?
Well, look, I mean, to be frank, going into it, we had a variety of people that we were looking at for these roles. I was adamant that if we were going to cast a Māori actor in any role, it was going to be as the mother, as Jill, as the matriarch of the family, someone who's strong, committed, thinks smart, reacts well, and has a lot of skin in the game considering what she goes through. And why I was adamant that we were going to cast a Māori actor in that role was because those are the types of roles that Māori female actors never get cast in. And I really wanted to go against that sort of stereotype. From there, and that said, once Miriama McDowell auditions for you, it's a no-brainer. Miriama is one of our best actors, regardless of race and culture. With with Mandrake and Tubbs, you know, I always had a feeling it was going to be a case of wanting to represent both Pākehā and or Māori Pacifica. And important to note that Matthias Luafutu, who plays Tubbs, is Samoan. He's not Māori.
Okay.
And I think that's important to have a mix there, because ultimately what we're talking about with their characters is, yes, you can look to the facts of what institutions that were state-run. Obviously, from the 70s onwards, the residency is predominantly Māori, is predominantly Pacifica. But ultimately, what we're looking at is how children were failed. And for me, you know, it's really important to go. I'm not looking at children by demographic. I'm looking at all of those, you know, the 100,000 children who went through those institutions and were failed by them. So that's probably, you know, why it wasn't. I knew it was going to go in a mixed marriage of sorts on both pairs, but also, you know, I'm not particularly. I'm not making a statement. It's there. I know I have my reasons why we did it, like I've said, but equally that could have played out in another roundabout way with those characters in particular. So there's no denying that, you know, state-run institutions and the abuse that, you know, and the failings that they've had on countries like New Zealand, like Australia, you know, that there is a strong aspect of colonisation to the implementation of those places and such. So, like I say, I always knew it was going to be part of that, but ultimately too, you don't want to discount what the actor, the right tool for the right job, and what the actor brings. Matthias Luafutu was somebody I pretty much always had in the back of my head for the role of Tubbs. You know, just it was just sort of sitting there when we started writing it, and that's because probably you know, I went to drama school with Matthias. I know what his strengths are. I know what a huge talent he is, and also I know how to work with him. And you know, if anything, I think, you know, he brings, you know, the most emotional and grounded performance to the work. And he doesn't say that. He says that in three lines, I think.
Yeah, no, he's extraordinary. The casting across the board is one of the many assets of the film. I also want to ask about the language and the use of violence. What are your views on how genre cinema uses violence in modern filmmaking? And is Coming Home in the Dark, I guess, a more elevated horror work for its undercutting of violence as a central component in the story? Because you show arguably the most heinous act in those first opening minutes. It's like what Spielberg did with Jaws. Once you open it with the worst it can be, and then your whole movie has this undercurrent of tension and horror about it.
Yeah, look, I think in terms of violence, I think it depends on what your film is. I mean, you know, there's violence that can be enjoyable. You know, Tarantino's made a huge living in great entertainment from the way he uses violence for humor, for drama, for shock. With this film in particular, you know, because it is a film that, you know, is a hard ask. But it was never our intention to make violence something that was going to be easy. We didn't want to make it palatable. If you actually watch the film back, you'll actually see that there's very little violence actually committed on screen. So, you know, trying to have a sense of responsibility as a filmmaker, I'm always going for, well, how do we engage emotion that's about feeling something rather than just something that's exploitive or shocking for shocking's sake. And there's no greater violence than exists in the audience's imagination. So that's why we sort of choreographed the violence to unfold and happen in that way. So it would sit within your psyche, within your consciousness, and therefore would make more of an impact. And again, it's about, you know, how is it relevant to the material? We're using violence to speak about something rather than as an entertaining factor.
You've made an extraordinary film, and congratulations and thank you for it. I can't let you go without confessing that I'm a bit of a Bigfoot crazy. I go to sleep every night with Bigfoot Experience, a podcast in my head. So I'm already sold on devolution. Where are you at with its development?
Look, unlike you, I never thought I would be interested in Sasquatch. And now I'm utterly obsessed and fascinated by it. I'm only just getting into this magnificent world of Bigfoot and his cousins across the world. It's been great that Legendary have taken a punt on Eli, Kent, and I to develop the script and myself to direct in the long run. We're writing the script at present. It's an amazing book. Max is a really great writer, and again, it's like I say, I wasn't necessarily expecting to fall in love with Sasquatch lore, but again, it's his. Max is writing a story. Sasquatch is only part of it, and that's the mirror to what the story is really about, which is about human arrogance and hubris in the face of thinking we can just simply go into other people's houses, do as we wish, and when that sort of very tenuous link to civilization is cut, what happens to us then? And so that's the human drama of watching this eco community sort of implode, and then have to deal with the threat of the environmental top apex predator, which is Sasquatch. So I'm really loving it. It's going to be a wild ride. We think of it as the Poseidon Adventure meets an adult Jurassic Park meets Straw Dogs.
Oh my God. You've got me. I'm hooked. That's going to be a lot of fun. Mate, congratulations on coming home in the dark. You've got your career hook in me now. I'm going to be watching everything you do. So thank you for the film, and thanks for being part of Screen Watching.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Simon.
All right, James. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.